A country's currency becomes powerful due to its economy, and America's economy is by far the strongest in the world. This domination of the dollar started after World War II, as the U.S. was the biggest economy in the world and other countries were trying to overcome the aftermath of World War, and the dollar was stable. So how does the dollar become the most chosen currency in the world? If you want to know about the complete history of it, stick to the video till the end, as most of the information will be provided in the latter part of the video. Hello, and welcome to our channel. Today we are going to talk about how the dollar became the king of currencies in the world. Since the US dollar is by far the most powerful currency in the world, and the US economy is so interwoven with the global economy, even a small change anywhere can have a significant impact on the entire globe. Because of this, anytime the US economy experiences ups and downs, it makes headlines in all newspapers. Stock markets throughout the world experience ups and downs, and most significantly, it has an impact on the lives of more than 3 billion people. Because of the dollar, the US can exercise its supremacy to the point that it can essentially boost or destroy the economies of the majority of nations in a matter of night. So many questions arise as to how does the dollar become so powerful? What exactly was the strategy of the presidents of the United States that gave America unprecedented power over the global economy? The story takes place in the 1940s, when the world had already experienced World War I and the Second World War was at its height. As we all know, the British Empire, with its numerous colonies spread throughout the world, was the dominant power at the time. But by the time they engaged in World Wars I and II, the majority of their wealth had deteriorated. In fact, by 1920, immediately following World War I, the British went from having $0.62 billion of debt in 1913 to $7.8 billion in 1930, which ranged from 25% of its GDP to 130% of its GDP, and was the case for all major nations worldwide, including France and the Soviet Union. The American government used all of its resources and manpower to become the world's top supplier of cotton, wheat, brass, copper, rubber, automobiles, machinery, and thousands of other goods, while all the major empires were occupied with fighting the war and devoting all of their resources to it. This shows how clever the American government was to enter these conflicts, first as war merchants and then as combatants. The outcome was one of the biggest economic booms ever seen in the history of the United States. The value of all U.S. exports increased from only $2.4 billion in 1913 to $6.1 billion in 1917. The same thing happened in World War II, when the U.S. turned into a war merchant and only joined the conflict after Pearl Harbor. The United States generated so much money while every other nation's economy was destroyed by two of the most costly and large-scale wars in history that it possessed 75% of the world's gold reserves. Within a span of 4 years from 1910 to 1914, the U.S. gold reserve went from 2,000 tons to almost 20,000 tons. At this time, the U.S. seized the chance to bring together 44 nations from around the globe to sign the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944, whereby these nations agreed to peg their currencies to the dollar, and the U.S. dollar was finally pegged or tied to gold. The Bretton Woods Agreement stated that they would back the dollars with gold, so that 1 ounce, or 28.35 grams, of gold would be valued at $35. They also stated that if you owned the dollars and came to us, we would redeem its value in gold, as in, we would exchange the dollars for the gold. In this way, it became incredibly convenient for countries to conduct trade with one another, even if they didn't trust each other's government. The World Bank and the International Monetary Fund were the first two significant organizations to be created as a result of the agreement. Loans were essential for the majority of the world's nations to rebuild their economies after two devastating wars. So, as you can see, thanks to American funding, the World Bank dispersed sizable loans to assist these nations in getting back on track, and these nations benefited from IMF facilities as well. The IMF monitors the world economy, offers policymakers assistance, and most importantly lends money to nations that are having trouble with their national budgets. This is the reason behind why nations like Pakistan and Sri Lanka are still looking to the IMF for assistance in ending their economic problems today. In this way, the Bretton Woods Agreement solidified the value of U.S. dollars and granted the U.S. significant leverage over other nations. This was the initial stage of the U.S. dollar's emergence as the dominant currency. Second phase of this emergence is also called the love affair of U.S. dollars and oil. When Russia, Britain, and the United States were occupied fighting Germany, Italy, and Japan in World War II, Arabs in Saudi Arabia were relaxing in the desert and had nothing to do with the conflict itself. In fact, they were unaware that they were sitting on the largest black gold mine in the world. During this time, which is the 1930s and 1940s, American and British companies supplied oil to the entire world, and only these companies actually had the technology to extract the black gold. In 1938, an American-owned oil well in Saudi Arabia drilled into a vast oil deposit at a time when the Saudis were not at all wealthy because they had just recently begun to produce oil. Italy launched several bombs on Saudi Arabia during the war in an effort to hit the American bases there, and as a result of this onslaught, the Saudis had difficulty producing oil at their maximum capacity. Frank Roosevelt, the American president at the time, recognized that oil holds the key to global prosperity for the ensuing 60 years. He met with the Saudi king as a result, which may have permanently altered the course of the U.S. dollar. What the bargain was is the key question. As it turned out, the Saudi wells that Americans were digging were the largest oil wells in the world, and from there on, the rise of the Middle East started, and after the 1960s in OPEC, all oil-producing countries started selling oil in dollars. The U.S. offered Saudi Arabia to protect from any future attacks and provide them with all military equipment. In exchange, he asked the Saudi king to sell oil in U.S. dollars only. How did this meeting and arrangement establish the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency? The third stage of the dollar's ascension to the position of king of all currency is this one. Recall the Bretton Woods Pact, in which America pledged to convert its currency into gold. But by the 1970s, the country's economy had deteriorated to the point where its gold reserves had decreased from 22,000 tons in 1950 to 10,000 tons in 1970. The Bretton Woods system had failed in 1973 as a result of a number of factors, including the Vietnam War, rising gold prices, U.S. liabilities, and so forth. In short, U.S. gold reserves were so low that they could no longer afford to maintain exchanging gold for dollars. The application of what one's currency could purchase on the international market, from whom, and what the U.S. dollar could buy you was one of the currency arrangements that the countries were free to choose. And what could U.S. dollar buy you? It is the most valuable commodity of the century, and that is oil. The majority of nations kept their foreign exchange reserves in U.S. dollars by default, so they could purchase oil from the Arabs. But at the same time, the value of other currencies like the euro, yen, and yuan started to increase in global trade. The Society for International Interbank Financial Telecommunications, also known as the FAST network, was developed by American and European banks to facilitate trade payments. The question at hand is how this phenomenon made the U.S. a superpower. The SWIFT network holds the key to the solution. As an illustration, consider the 6 different entities that make up the SWIFT network: an Indian trader, an Indian bank, 2 American banks, a foreign bank, and a foreign trader. As a result, the Indian bank will have an account with the American banks, where it will deposit its own funds in dollars, similar to the Indian and Sri Lankan banks. Banks all over the world have bank accounts with American banks, where their money is stored in dollars so that they can conduct international trade in dollars. The Sri Lankan bank will have a bank account in an American bank, where they will store their money in dollars. Now, if any Indian firm, such as Reliance, wishes to trade in any minerals, it would first transfer $5 million to its account with an Indian bank before sending the money to a Sri Lankan bank in the United States. From the Indian bank account at the American bank, it will now be transferred in dollars to the Sri Lankan bank account. The Sri Lankan traders would receive the same payment. Foreign reserves held by nations having American bank accounts are invested in U.S. Treasury bonds. Similar to government bonds, These megabonds entail other nations, loan the U.S. excess currency in the billions with the expectation of receiving money back once the bonds mature. The numbers will drive you insane. In January 2022, China held $1.06 trillion in U.S. assets, Japan held $1.3 trillion, and the UK possessed $608 billion. As of September 2021, foreign and international investors held a total of $7 trillion in the U.S. The U.S. has the chance to develop its military, grant loans to other nations, finance the World Bank, and ultimately exercise incredible dominance over other nations thanks to this absurd quantity of money. If something's done against the U.S., they can just freeze their Forex account and cripple the economy in just a fortnight. Let us know in the comment if you need any specific topic to be explained. We would be more than happy to address them for you. With that, we have come to an end. See you in the next video.